He gave the world motion, but spent his life trying to slow it down. Henry Ford, the man who built an empire of wheels and steel, believed that progress should serve people, not consume them. Yet in chasing perfection, he created a machine that would never stop. At the dawn of the 20th century, America was restless, a nation of smoke, factories, and dreams. And in the middle of it stood a farmer's son from Michigan, staring at a world still bound by horses and mud. He saw not chaos but potential. Where others saw distance, he saw connection. Where others saw labor, he saw liberation. He once said, "If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses." So he built something faster than imagination itself. The automobile was not his invention, but his revolution. Ford didn't invent the car. He invented access, a promise that movement belonged to everyone, not just the privileged few. His Model T was more than a machine. It was a social equalizer, a mechanical declaration of independence. But progress has two sides. As the wheels of industry turned faster, so did the gears of control. The same man who preached freedom began to demand discipline, precision, and uniformity. Factories became cathedrals of order. Workers moved like pistons, repeating the same motions, hour after hour, in service of a dream that was no longer theirs. He built the system that built the world, and the system soon outgrew its maker. So who was Henry Ford really? A liberator or a mechanic of obedience? He gave humanity the power to move, but in doing so, he bound it to the rhythm of the machine. That is the paradox of progress, when what sets us free also makes us captive. Long before the assembly lines, before the smoke and steel, there was a boy on a quiet farm in Michigan who hated the sound of stillness. Henry Ford was born in 1863, among wheat fields and wooden barns, the son of a farmer who believed the earth would always be man's destiny. But Henry disagreed. He wanted to build, not harvest. The creak of the plow bored him. The rhythm of gears enchanted him. From the moment he could walk, he was taking things apart. Clocks, toys, farm tools, not out of mischief, but hunger. He needed to understand how things worked, how movement could be tamed. His father scolded him for wasting time. His mother, Mary, watched in silence, sensing that this boy was wired differently. A dreamer built from metal, not soil. When she died, Henry was only 13. Something in him hardened that day. He turned inward, retreating into the world of machines, where things could be fixed, where chaos could be controlled. The farm became his workshop. He built a small steam engine using scrap metal and a bit of genius, and watched it come alive. That sound, that first hiss of power, would haunt him forever. At 16, he packed his few belongings and left for Detroit, chasing the pulse of industry. He worked as an apprentice machinist, long hours in dark shops, surrounded by sparks and oil. He slept on benches, saved every penny, and spent his nights studying engines under candlelight. He wasn't educated in theory, but in friction. He once said, "You can't learn to build by watching. You learn by breaking." When the internal combustion engine emerged in the 1880s, most dismissed it as impractical, noisy, and dangerous. But Henry saw destiny in its roar. Steam was the past. Gasoline was the future. He joined the Edison Illuminating Company as an engineer, mastering electricity while secretly building his own motor car in a small shed behind his house. Nights turned into years of trial and error, melted pistons, failed ignitions, sleepless calculations. He worked in silence, obsessed with one question: could a machine make freedom mechanical? In 1896, his experiment finally rolled forward, a wooden frame on 4 bicycle wheels, powered by a trembling 2-cylinder engine. The neighbors called it madness. He called it the quadricycle. When it rattled down the dirt road for the first time, Ford wasn't smiling. He was thinking, already redesigning, already simplifying. He didn't want to build luxury. He wanted to build utility. The automobile to him wasn't a toy for the rich. It was a tool for the worker, a bridge between towns, a new rhythm for the modern world. "I will build a car for the great multitude," he vowed. "It will be so low in price that no man will be too poor to own one." In that promise lay both the purity and the peril of his vision, the belief that machines could elevate mankind if designed with purpose. He didn't know it yet, But the boy who escaped the farm to free others from labor was about to trap the world in a different kind of field, one made not of soil, but of steel, repetition, and speed. Detroit in the 1890s was a city caught between centuries, half horse, half engine. The streets were muddy, the air thick with soot, and the idea of a motor car still sounded like fantasy. But in a small workshop behind his home, Henry Ford was chasing that fantasy with a stubborn calm that bordered on obsession. He was now the chief engineer at Edison Illuminating Company, earning enough to live comfortably, but not enough to silence his hunger. Every night, after his shift ended, he returned to his garage, a narrow wooden shed lit by oil lamps, and worked alone until dawn. Gears, chains, pipes, and pistons covered the floor. His neighbors heard strange noises and thought he was crazy. He was, in the most necessary way. Ford wasn't chasing wealth. He was chasing order. He believed the internal combustion engine could do what steam never could: compress chaos into reliability. The machine, he said, should never ask for permission to move. By 1896, after years of failed models, his quadricycle finally came to life. It sputtered, coughed, and rattled forward down the alley. It wasn't fast. It wasn't elegant, but it moved freely. Ford followed it barefoot in the dirt, tears in his eyes. That night, he met Thomas Edison at a conference and nervously described his experiment. Edison, already a legend, struck the table and said, "Keep at it, young man, you're on to something." Those words ignited him. For Ford, Edison's approval wasn't just praise. It was permission to defy convention. He quit his job soon after and devoted himself entirely to building cars. But his first companies, Detroit Automobile Company and later Henry Ford Company, collapsed under pressure. Investors wanted luxury models for the rich. Ford wanted simplicity for the masses. They fired him. He started again. Failure didn't discourage him. It clarified him. Each setback stripped away what was unnecessary: design, excess, pride, until only purpose remained. He once told a friend, "Every mistake is simply another way of moving forward." In 1903, with a handful of partners and $28,000 in capital, he founded the Ford Motor Company. The mission was radical: to build a car ordinary people could afford, maintain, and repair themselves. He believed accessibility was the truest form of innovation. A product, he said, is only as good as the number of lives it improves. 5 years later, his answer arrived: the Model T. Simple, strong, reliable. Painted black to drive faster on the production line. It could drive through mud, snow, and time itself. The car wasn't beautiful, it was inevitable. Ford didn't invent the automobile. He invented mobility. When the first Model Ts rolled onto American roads in 1908, they didn't just carry passengers, they carried an idea. Freedom was no longer abstract. It had wheels. Families could travel farther. Workers could live beyond the factory. And the map of the world began to stretch. The machine had delivered motion, and motion had delivered possibility. What Ford didn't yet see, not then, was that every revolution of a wheel also turns the gears of consequence. Because once you teach the world to move, you can never make it stop. By 1913, America was racing toward modernity, and Henry Ford was at the front of the charge, designing not just machines, but an entirely new rhythm for civilization. The Model T was already a success, but Ford wasn't satisfied. He didn't want to build more cars. He wanted to build them faster. He believed that waste, of time, motion, or material, was humanity's greatest flaw. The real enemy, he said, is inefficiency. Inside the vast walls of his Highland Park plant in Detroit, he began an experiment that would change not only industry, but identity itself. He called it the moving assembly line. It started as a simple idea. Instead of workers moving to the car would move to the workers. A chain would pull the chassis slowly through the factory as hundreds of hands, each trained for a single motion, added parts in perfect sequence. The result was breathtaking. A process that once took 12 hours could now be done in 93 minutes. The machine was no longer built by men. It was built through them. Ford watched from a balcony as the first line came to life. The hum of gears, the synchronized footsteps, the hypnotic click of tools. It was efficiency turned into choreography, labor transformed into tempo. "It is beautiful," he whispered. It is music. But not everyone heard the same melody. To many workers, the new system felt mechanical, relentless. They were no longer craftsmen, just extensions of the conveyor belt. The labor was faster, but their souls slower. Turnover skyrocketed. Men quit after weeks, unable to endure the repetition. So Ford made a decision as radical as his machines. He doubled their pay. In 1914, he announced the $5 workday, twice the average wage at the time, and reduced shifts to 8 hours. Critics called him insane. Economists called him naive. But Ford understood what others didn't. Stability creates loyalty, and loyalty creates efficiency. He wasn't just paying workers more, he was turning them into customers. The same men who built the Model T could now afford to buy one. It was both compassion and calculation, morality and marketing all at once. The results were explosive. Productivity soared, turnover plummeted, and the Model T became the heartbeat of a new age. In just a few years, Ford was producing half of all cars on Earth. The black silhouette of his creation filled every road, every dream. He had done what no industrialist had ever done before. Democratized mobility. He had made speed affordable. But in doing so, he had also created something deeper, a new kind of man. The factory worker of Ford's world didn't just make cars. He became part of the machine, measured, timed, disciplined, efficient. Henry Ford had found the perfect rhythm between man and mechanism. He had taught the world how to move together, but in that rhythm, individuality began to disappear. He had given birth to the modern age and, unknowingly, to the age of control. By the 1920s, Henry Ford was more than an industrialist. He was an idea. His factories stretched across continents. His Model T ruled the roads, and his name had become a synonym for progress itself. But the same man who once sought to liberate humanity through motion was now obsessed with mastering it. Ford didn't just build machines. He built systems, complete, closed, and unquestioned. Inside his empire, every bolt, every shift, every life followed a rhythm he had designed. There is a right way to do everything, he said, and it is my way. His vision had hardened into doctrine. He called it Fordism, the philosophy of mass production and mass discipline. It promised prosperity through uniformity. His assembly lines didn't just produce cars, they produced culture. Consistency became virtue. Repetition became law. The world moved faster, but less freely. Inside the factories, Ford's sociological department monitored employees not only at work but at home. Investigators checked if workers drank, gambled, or wasted money. A man could lose his job not for inefficiency, but for immorality. Ford believed that progress demanded purity, that productivity was a form of virtue. You can't build good machines, he said, with bad men. He saw himself not as a boss, but as a reformer. Yet his reform looked a lot like control. At his peak, he employed more than 200,000 people, paid record wages, and dictated how they lived. He banned alcohol, discouraged unions, and even tried to reshape communities. In 1918, he founded Fordlandia, a utopian city deep in the Brazilian jungle, a dream of order carved from chaos. It collapsed within a few years, consumed by disease, rebellion, and reality. Still, Ford couldn't stop. The more his empire grew, the more he feared losing command of it. He turned his gaze toward culture itself. He bought newspapers, published manifestos, and spoke openly against bankers, politicians, and anyone he distrusted. The man who once democratized motion began to distrust democracy. To his admirers, he was a genius, a man who transformed the modern age. To his critics, he was a tyrant in overalls, a prophet who mistook control for creation. And yet beneath the rigidity, there remained a strange tenderness. Ford still believed he was serving humanity, that discipline would lead to dignity. But he no longer realized that people were not pistons, and that a world run by machines would eventually run over the men who built it. By the late 1920s, his empire had become unshakable, vast, efficient, and obedient. He had conquered chaos, bent labor to his will, and made speed the heartbeat of civilization. But the faster the world moved, the further it drifted from him. He had set humanity in motion, and now it was moving beyond his control. The empire Henry Ford built with discipline and precision began to crack under its own perfection. By the 1930s, America was drowning in the Great Depression, and the man who once symbolized progress had become its paradox, a billionaire preaching simplicity while workers starved outside his factories. Inside the colossal walls of the River Rouge plant, the rhythm of the machines never stopped. Steel poured, engines roared, but morale withered. Wages were cut, hours stretched thin, and the $5 dream that had once inspired hope was now a memory. Ford refused to negotiate with unions. To him, collective power was chaos, and chaos was the enemy. The moment you give in to fear, he said, the machine stops. But fear had already entered the factory. The workers no longer moved like parts of a single engine. They trembled under it. The very system that once liberated them now felt like a prison. Protest turned to defiance. In 1937, violence erupted at the gates of River Rouge. Ford's private security forces, under his powerful enforcer Harry Bennett, beat striking workers in what would become known as the Battle of the Overpass. Photographs of bloodied men sprawled on concrete spread across newspapers nationwide. The world saw not a visionary, but a dictator. For the first time, Ford's image shattered. The man who had given the world mobility was now seen as a symbol of control and cruelty. He didn't apologize. He simply turned inward, building higher walls between himself and the world. The years that followed brought more losses. His only son, Edsel Ford, the gentle heir who dreamed of modernizing the company with compassion, died of cancer in 1943, worn down by years of pressure from his father. It broke something inside him. Ford, now old and frail, walked the factory floor in silence. The machines still ran, but their rhythm no longer matched his heartbeat. He had spent a lifetime fighting disorder, and in the end, it had consumed everything around him. Workers despised him. The public turned away. Even his faith in progress began to fade. The only history that matters, he once said bitterly, is the history we make today. By the time World War II ended, Ford's empire was no longer his. The machines he created now belonged to another generation. Faster, hungrier, less forgiving. In his twilight years, he would often sit by the river that powered his factories, watching the current drift past the steel walls that bore his name. The water, unlike his machines, could not be controlled. It simply moved forward, endlessly. Henry Ford had dreamed of perfect order, a world that ran as predictably as a motor. But in trying to mechanize humanity, he forgot that people were not machines. He built the engine of modern life, and in doing so, learned that no system, no matter how precise, can ever control the heart. On a quiet April morning in 1947, Henry Ford died in the same farmhouse where he had been born 84 years earlier, a few miles from the roaring factories that had remade the world. There was no ceremony, no final command. The lights flickered as a storm passed over Dearborn, and for a brief moment, the River Rouge ran dark and silent. The man who had taught humanity to move had finally stopped, but the world he left behind was still in motion, a living monument to his vision and his contradictions. Ford's Model T had done more than put wheels under America. It had redefined what freedom meant. It shrank distance, connected towns, and made time itself feel smaller. For the first time in history, ordinary people could travel by choice, not necessity. The open road became a symbol of destiny, and every engine a beating echo of his dream. Yet his legacy wasn't just industrial, it was psychological. He changed how people thought, how they worked, consumed, and measured life. The assembly line became the blueprint of modern civilization, replicated in every industry from food to film to finance. It promised prosperity, but demanded obedience. The system that gave birth to modern abundance also gave birth to modern fatigue. That duality is Henry Ford's greatest paradox. He gave the world convenience, and in doing so, created its restlessness. Today, every factory, every highway, every hum of an engine carries his fingerprint. We live in the rhythm he composed, the rhythm of repetition, efficiency, and endless pursuit. But behind that precision lies something more human. His belief that innovation was a form of empathy, that invention was not for power, but for people. A business that makes nothing but money, he once said, is a poor business. And despite his flaws, his control, his prejudice, his obsession, that belief endured. His machines outlived his mistakes. Ford's empire became a global symbol, reshaped by others, refined by time, but always rooted in the same idea: progress belongs to everyone. He didn't live to see the highways that stretched across continents, or the satellites that guided the cars that descended from his Model T. But in a way, they were all extensions of his dream. Motion without boundaries, freedom engineered into form. In his final years, Ford often sat by the window watching the workers leave the factory gates at dusk. Their laughter, their chatter, their cars rolling into the horizon. That was the music he loved most. He never built for power. He built for permanence. Henry Ford didn't just manufacture automobiles. He manufactured the modern age, and with it, the question that still drives us today. When everything can move faster, can the human heart still keep up? Because his greatest invention wasn't the car. It was the realization that progress, no matter how loud, always begins with a single turn of the human will.